Deputy Speaker, and of course I draw attention to my register of interests. Like most people on this side, I'm proudly supported by trade unions. As others have already alluded to, the absence of the honourable members from Reform in this debate, and of course we know why they're not here. It's because they don't support the measures in the Employment Rights Bill, but they don't have the guts to tell that to their voters. And I'm here today to speak on behalf of my constituents, particularly those who feel insecure at work, the people who don't have assets and safety nets, who are not mobile and confident, who live payday to payday and feel that they must take whatever pay and conditions they're offered because they're terrified of the alternative. It's 12 years since this party announced a commitment to end exploitative zero-hour contracts as a means to control workers and avoid employment obligations.
Would the honourable member give way?
I will happily give way.
As a former teaching assistant, many teaching assistants were working under a form of zero-hours contracts. Now, would the honourable member not agree that this bill, as well as bringing back the negotiating body for teaching assistants and support staff at school, will also greatly help them in taking away those zero-hours contracts that they were suffering under previously?
Absolutely will, and I mentioned 12 years ago. I remember canvassing 12 years ago and speaking to a young couple, a young woman who had just had a baby, but because she was on a zero-hours contract was not able to get the maternity rights that she would have otherwise been entitled to, and her young partner who likewise was on a zero-hour contract. And I remember listening to him talk about his pay and conditions at work and asking him why does he not challenge his employer, and understanding that so many young people don't feel that they're able to because they feel so insecure and sometimes just so grateful to be in a job. And that's why I'm speaking against Amendment 1 today. It's absolutely right that the onus be placed upon the employer to ensure that people are given regular contracts, and that we're not asking people who are often the most vulnerable and insecure workers to have to go to that employer and start asserting and demanding their rights. And it's something that I've sadly learned in this job over the last year or so as I've met with many of my constituents, just the sheer vulnerability that many working people feel, and whether that's a tenant who tells me that they're frightened of demanding rights from their landlord because they feel that they'll be evicted. And of course Reform voted against our reforms on banning no-fault evictions too, or whether it's somebody who feels... I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend who's making a very powerful speech. He quite rightly mentioned how honourable members opposite from the Reform UK party are not in their place. And does he agree with me that this really is a travesty? When you think about the social media posts that they put out, the grand speeches that are given up and down this land, does he agree with me that it really is a travesty for them to claim to be on the side of working people when they have the audacity to vote against this bill before this House, introduced by a Labour government on the side of working people?
Well, it won't surprise him that I completely agree with that assessment. They're clearly not on the side of my constituents and the people that I'm talking about who just don't feel that they can assert their rights. Too many of them feel completely powerless, and so it's right that we put the onus where it is, and I will vote against the attempts in the Lords to water that part of the bill down. I will.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for giving way. Just on that point, in terms of accessing those rights, does he agree with me that there is a fundamental difference in terms of people going about their busy daily lives at work, possibly struggling to make ends meet? There's a fundamental difference in terms of them accessing the rights that this bill will give them between a right to a contract with guarantees hours in it and a right to request one.
There is a difference, and that's why, and he is expert in this field, having come to us from the USDOR union, and so I know that those who worked on this bill would have thought this through carefully, and it certainly chimes with my experience that people shouldn't need to have to request and assert their rights. They should be given those rights, and that's what this government's doing.
Would my friend allow?
I will.
I thank my friend for giving way. Madam Speaker, I draw attention to my register of interests as a member of Unison and GMB and someone who received financial support during the election from trade unions. One of the things I found when I was a trade union official was it wasn't necessarily people who were also not confident in asserting their own rights. It's for a number of workers, they simply did not know what those rights were. Oddly enough, employers weren't running around handing out little laminated cards saying, here's all the rights you can ask me for. So if the employers aren't made necessarily to tell the rights, how else are employees meant to find out?
Sam Rushworth.
Absolutely agree with him, and I think that's what this bill speaks to. There's a power gap in this country between the ordinary working person who doesn't necessarily know and is able to assert those rights, and the sort of person who, for example, might buy a house in their girlfriend's name. So I'll progress. I'd likewise want to oppose the Lord's attempt in Amendment 106 to water down the bill by requiring 6 months for protection from unfair dismissal. There is, of course, a difference between unfair dismissal and fair dismissal. No employer is prevented from using fair grounds to dismiss an employee. But what the previous government did, but by extending it to 2 years before you could even claim unfair dismissal, left far too many people vulnerable to being simply dismissed at a whim or dismissed because they have demanded their rights at work. I had an experience of this myself. I've never talked about it before because I signed a non-disclosure agreement. But shortly after becoming the branch rep for the UCU trade union, when I was a college lecturer, I pointed out that the college I was teaching at was not paying the minimum wage to some of their staff. The college then attempted to dismiss me for bringing the college into disrepute. I thankfully was able to take on one of the top employment lawyers in the area at the time, only because they'd forced me to teach a HR course and give myself a crash course in human rights law, and left that place with a payout. But I remember at the time the shame that I felt at signing this non-disclosure agreement, because I felt like I wanted to fight for other people too. But at the end of the day, I was terrified that I was going to miss my next mortgage payment, and I was thinking of my children. And that's the position that far too many people find themselves in. And so it's right what we're doing on non-disclosure. And to try to water that down, I have to ask all members of this House as they vote on that particular issue, whose side are they on? Will they be on the side of those seeking to cover up sexual harassment rather than on the side of the whistleblowers? And in my mind's eye, as I vote this evening, real people in Bishop Auckland constituency, I want to tell you about 2 or 3 of them. A few months ago, I received correspondence from a parish councillor. He's also a local farmer and a member of the Labour Party. And he told me that he was concerned that he was seeing these, that every day he saw 2 women sitting in the bus shelter in a cold hilltop village. And so he approached them to ask what are they doing there, because they were there for several hours. It turned out these people were care workers. They were dropped off in the morning, they would do a visit, and at another point of day in the day they'd do another visit, and another visit later. But they were only paid for the specific time that they were in those people's houses. They weren't paid for the entirety of the day. That's a workaround to avoid paying the minimum wage to these people. And this bill makes the provision of a fair pay agreement in adult social care to address such practices. And by the way, he then opened the village hall for them and made sure that they had a warm space to wait each day between their shifts.
Will the honourable member give way?
I will.
Must first refer to my register of interest because I also was a Unison rep and have taken contributions from Unison and other unions towards my election expenses. The point I wanted to make is the point you were making is a very real one in Cornwall as well. And we've had migrant workers, particularly care workers, who were left on a bench in a village from the early morning shift to the late evening shift. And this is also something that must be addressed and will be addressed under this bill.
It will absolutely. It is 2025. We shouldn't have people working in those kind of conditions and that sort of poverty in 2025.
I thank him for giving way. He spoke about care workers. Does he agree that one of the issues so brutally exposed during the pandemic was the fact that many thousands of care workers are classed as workers, not employees? As a consequence, they could not get full access to sick pay, and one of the consequences of that issue was that fatality rates, both amongst residents and workers, was much higher in care homes, which did not make that provision available. If the provisions in this bill were in place then, many thousands of lives could have been saved.
He raises an excellent point, and another great provision of this bill around that right to sick pay that's so important and would have been so important for many care workers during the pandemic. And so in my mind's eye are these women sitting at that bus stop in the cold, and two other people I met, also care workers, one who lives in the Red Houses area of Etherley Dean, and another who lives, in High Etherley, and another who lives in Etherley Dean. Both told me similar stories. They didn't vote for me. They didn't vote for anybody because they didn't believe that anyone could fix their problems. They just told me that their lives were tough. They had to pay for their own uniforms. They weren't really getting the minimum wage for their work. They felt disrespected by everybody. They felt vulnerable and left behind. But I made them a promise that if I came to this place, I would speak up for them. And I'm doing that today. And I'm voting for them today as well. And finally, may I say, the Employment Rights Bill is not just good for workers. It's good for businesses. I meet so many family businesses in Bishop Auckland, in Shildon, in Crook, in Barnard Castle, and they all tell me the same thing. They tell me how much they enjoy contributing to our local economy and how important it is to them that they are a responsible, decent employer. But they tell me how tough it is when there's a race to the bottom. They want these employment rights strengthening. They don't want the watered-down version coming to us from the Lords. They want the full, fat version of this bill because they know that it's good for their workers and it's good for their business too.